Haram love. This is a story of an unacceptable or forbidden love affair resulting from racist motives between a white Sudanese Arab girl and a black African Zanji boy from South Sudan. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author except by a reviewer, who may cite brief passages from the review for printing in a general magazine, a school journal, or a university article. All characters in this love story are fictitious, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 40. A father's surprise visit to his wayward son's hut. After divorcing his Ethiopian wife, Ababa, and expelling his son, Mr. Majak Nasser locked himself in the four corners of his house. He is deeply hurt by his son's stern decision to pursue a defense in criminal court for his former Arab girlfriend, Insaf. He convinced himself that his African son rejected him and pursued a fallen Arab girl. She was a prostitute and a street girl that any man could take to his bed and commit adultery with her for a small price of haram money. Despite this, the grieving father, deep in his heart, always misses his only son, Dang, and misses his beloved Ethiopian wife, Ababa. It has been many days and many months since his son and wife left home. From time to time, Mr. Majak Nasser hears news about his disobedient son through relatives and friends. He heard that the criminal Arab girl was convicted of murder and sentenced to death through hanging, but she obtained a presidential pardon. Shortly after, he was told that his prodigal son married the same accursed Arab girl, who was the main reason for his son's rejection of his father and mother, and the reason for the divorce and separation between his parents. The informants who brought the unpleasant news claimed that his African son seemed incredibly happy with his beautiful Arab wife. Such positive information increased Mr. Nasser's sadness and loneliness. But the recent negative news about the prodigal son Dang disturbed Father Majak Nasser's heart and increased his sadness. The person who made the negative report supported his point of view by saying that the husband Dang has been living alone for a month. When the neighbors asked the African husband, he admitted that his Arab wife had left him permanently and expelled him from where she lived. Moreover, the informant said that the African husband was living in a very miserable state after his Arab wife separated from him. Since the day she left from their small hut, he has not shaved his beard or mustache. He did not comb his hair or wash his clothes. He wears black morning dresses all the time. He dropped out of medical school and spends most of his time in his one-room shack in the poor Alash shantytown. For 2 days, the father, Majak Nasser, resisted the paternal impulse and the voice of conscience urging him to see his missing son. But on the 3rd day, he surrendered to the voice of his conscience and decided to go and save his lost son. He got up from his chair and put on his beautiful military uniform. In fact, Mr. Majak Nasser is a lieutenant general and a senior official in the Sudanese army. His ex-Abyssinian wife, Mrs. Ababa Nasser, Dang's mother, is an English language teacher at the girls' high school in the Riyadh neighborhood in Khartoum, which is one of the most prestigious and luxurious neighborhoods in the triangular Sudanese capital. On that day, after finally making his fatherly decision, the lieutenant general walked to his double garage, which contained 2 cars, one military and the other private. Then he got into his own brand new car and started the engine. While he was driving his car, the father wondered how his son could live in a disreputable area like Al-Ashish with a criminal street prostitute. Before that, he lived with his parents in the best area in Khartoum called the city of Riyadh. Alash is a shanty town located on the outskirts of the cosmopolitan city of Khartoum. It is a slum area or settlement of improvised housing known as Jingo slave slums. The huts are made of plywood, corrugated metal, plastic sheets, and cardboard boxes collected by destitute Africans from garbage containers discarded by the rich. Its African population is poor, like the so-called outcasts in the slums of Bombay's Darabi neighborhood. Most of them are black Sudanese displaced from South Sudan, the Nuba Mountains, and the Darfur region due to civil wars, famines, floods, and desertification. Lieutenant General Mr. Majak Nasser had never visited this notorious side of the international city. What would he do if one of his fellow military officers, relatives, or friends saw him there? He will conclude that he is looking for a prostitute to fill the void in his life after he divorced his Abyssinian wife, or for drugs or alcohol to compensate for the loss of his family. As Mr. Majak Nasser drove his car through the narrow and winding lanes of the shantytown, he was very puzzled by his son's foolishness. How could he leave his beautiful residence and a good area to come and stay in such a disreputable place? For a few minutes, Mr. Majak Nasser's mind was mystified by the mystery of love. When his expensive car stopped in front of his son's small hut, many children and stray dogs surrounded it. These skinny, emaciated black children are either naked or barefoot, and most of the dogs are without owners, rabid and tempted. Mr. Majak Nasser is afraid to get out of his car and face hungry dogs and emaciated children. He saw children touching his car and smearing it with their dirty hands while begging for alms. Rabid dogs bark in the car and want to break down its door and attack and eat the huge black human being hiding from them like a gorilla in a cage at the zoo. The frightened father's eyes became even more frightened when they suddenly saw the tall, thin, black ghost-like person who opened the door of his son's hut and walked towards him. For some time, Mr. Majak Nasser was unable to recognize his son Deng. There was nothing left of his prodigal son that would make him known to his father. Instead of the handsome face, athletic body, beautiful clothes, and friendly smile, he saw a gloomy face, a black dress, and a thin body that looked like a zombie who had come out of his grave. Dad, said Deng surprisingly. The familiar voice of his only son jolted Mr. Majak Nasser out of the shell of his luxury car. Instead of greeting or embracing his son, the father walked straight into the hut. His little son's nest seemed to the father to be a den of thieves and not a dwelling for a beloved couple. Deng and Insaf's small hut room will be judged by Lieutenant General Nasser's standards as a storage room. Even one of the 4 bathrooms in his luxurious mansion is larger than his son's hut. Also, the 2-car garage is larger and more beautiful than this hut, which looks like a 2-bird nest hanging on a tree. There's nothing in this little nest that the rich daddy would call a human being's habitat. It's overall. The bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom are combined into one space. It does not have a toilet. The lovers use a nearby dirty public toilet used by hundreds of other Al-Ashish residents, men, women, and children. But woe to the female who dares to come into that public toilet at night. Drunks will rape her. There is no furniture inside the small nest, and there is not even a bed. Before they parted, the lovers slept on an old carpet spread on the floor. The father did not wait for his son to offer him a seat. He saw a small tin that looked like a wooden chair and sat on it. The thing shook and swayed when the lieutenant general sat on it, and he had to move it backward to support his back on the straw wall of the nest. When the father was sure that he would not fall behind or to either side, he began to address his lost son. Meanwhile, the rebellious son sat on the floor in the cut-up carpet with his hands crossed as if he were a pupil in seclusion to memorize the verses of the Holy Quran, and his father, like a sheikh, wanted to teach him the surahs of Jozo Amma with a whip. So, she left you, Mr. Majak Nasser said angrily. The lost son was unable to respond to his father's opening sentence. He knew that his father would not accept any justification for the misunderstanding that separated him from his Arab wife. I have been informed that you have left your medical school and are no longer continuing your studies at the prestigious University of Khartoum. Deng bowed his head and remained silent. Even a stray dog that has no owner will not live here. The prodigal son began to weep. Can you please open your mouth and tell me why she left you? There is a misunderstanding between us, Deng said in a hesitant voice. You disobeyed your father and mother, and this is the punishment for your reckless behavior. Deng stopped weeping and looked at his father. He wanted to speak, but his father interrupted him and asked him again, can you tell me exactly why she left you after you sacrificed your good African family, your beautiful Christian fiancée Susie, and your study of medicine at university for her sake? Before Deng could answer the question, his father answered his question. I can tell you why Insaf left you. She expected to live in a palace with her body full of gold and jewels, but when she found you to be a miserable person, she left you. She is now living as a second Muslim wife or secret concubine in an upscale neighborhood with a rich old Arab geezer as her sugar daddy. Of course, I don't blame her for that. A homeless girl found on the streets will always act like a street girl. In fact, she's worse than a street, homeless young woman. She is a dangerous criminal, murderer, thief, and dirty prostitute. Had the president of Sudan not sympathized with her because she was an Arab like him, she would have been hanged to death for her heinous crimes. The angry father's words of condemnation of the innocent Arab wife made her African husband open his mouth and speak his heart. The prodigal son exploded, saying, "Insaf has left me because of you, father." The father looked at his son in amazement. "We were separated because my father is Majak Nasir and her father is Salah al-Junaid. More simply put, my father is a Negro African and her father is a free Arab. I am also a son of the Dinka tribe and she is a daughter of the Shurjia tribe." Mr. Majak Nasir shouted with great anger, "Didn't we expect this in advance and tell you this from the beginning? Didn't we tell you that its Arab people will not accept you as a husband for their daughter because in their eyes you are just a black-faced Negro slave? Yes, you and my mother told me that before, but Insaf never looked at me in such a disgusting, racist way. If she had, she would not have lived with me in this little nest that you said not even a stray dog would live in. If she saw me as a black-faced Negro slave, and she was a free white Arab, she would not have married me and now carrying my child in her womb. Then why did she leave you?" The father screamed so angry that he almost flipped upside down from his tin on which he was sitting like a man riding the back of a colt. "Insaf did not leave me willingly. The Sharia court annulled our marriage." "Why did the Sharia court cancel your Islamic marriage if it was permissible halal and conducted in accordance with the Book of God and the Sunnah of his Prophet?" "It was cancelled in the Sharia court because of what I just told you, father." "This is nonsense." Mr. Majak Nasir shouted angrily. "I cannot believe that the Sharia court annulled your marriage to her because you are my son." Deng took out a small piece of paper from his bag and handed it to his father. Mr. Majak Nasir quickly read the legal document and threw it away as if it were a piece of paper stained with urine and feces. "This is nonsense. There is nothing like this in Islam. I had never heard of this racist law before." Son Deng replied, "Neither do I." The father continued to say with great astonishment the law of inadequacy between the wife's Arab tribe and the husband's African tribe. Who is her father? Isn't he a religious fanatic from the Ansar al-Sunnah group or a terrorist from the Muslim Brotherhood? I wouldn't even agree to let him polish my military boots in the street if he were a sidewalk polisher. Does he have a car or even know how to drive? What are his academic qualifications? Does he know how to read and write? He is a graduate of a preschool kalwa for memorizing the Holy Quran, so he is illiterate and does not even know how to write his name. The angry African father stopped and looked seriously at his son. Then he clapped his hands together and said sarcastically, "But I'm glad this is such a sad ending for you." The stubborn son who refused to listen to his parents' wise advice had to learn it the hard way. "We asked you to stay away from that Arab girl when we were in the city of Al-Gadarif, but you did not listen to us. So, see what the consequence of your disobedience is." Deng's tears continued to fall on his lap like raindrops. "And after all this happened to you, why didn't you humble yourself and come to your father to ask him for forgiveness?" The prodigal son remained silent. "Do you think that I have a heart of stone like her cruel Arab father, who threw her on the streets until she turned into a homeless girl, a murderer, a thief, and a prostitute?" The son shouted at his father angrily, saying, "Insaf is neither a prostitute nor a murderer. So, after all this, you still want to defend that useless Arab woman. Insaf left me because of a simple misunderstanding. Eventually, she will return to me, and the waters will return to normal, and we will live with each other again in this little nest. Then you will be violating the Sharia law if you take her as your wife again. Neither my Arab wife, Insaf, nor I, her African husband, Deng, believe in this unjust ruling of the Sharia court. Listen, my son Deng, I did not come here to argue with you about Sharia laws. I have come to offer you another chance for repentance and forgiveness and to bring you home. If you want me to return to your home, you must accept me along with my wife and the child she is carrying in her womb. I will never allow that accursed Arab woman to step foot on my doorstep. If she comes here into this filthy small nest, don't be surprised if she is reported to the police. Insaf is my wife, and the fetus in her womb is my child. If anyone tries to harm them, whether he is a police officer or a relative, I will be the first person to sacrifice his life for them. The angry father listened to his wayward son's last words with disbelieving ears. Then he stood up from the tin and marched out of the hut like a military soldier. Shortly after, the prodigal son began to hear the sound of his stiff-necked father's car making a loud noise while rabid dogs were barking at it, and the miserable black children were screaming at him and cursing him because he did not give them alms. Chapter 41. I cannot leave my husband and my home. The quarrel between the eternally intimate lovers Insaf and Deng is like a mountain of glaciers that took a long time to melt. It's been just over a month since they were legally and racially separated from each other. During that month, the Afrikaner husband, Deng, visited Haji Abdullahi's house 3 times. Each time he was sent away. During his last visit, Haj Abdullah advised him not to return to his doorstep again. After that, the African husband concluded that his marital relationship with his Arab wife had actually ended forever. In any case, Haj Mariam respected the African Negro until her husband decided to marry him to their Arab daughter, Safa. Since then, her hostility towards him intensified, and she began to hate him more than she hated the smell of her own excrement. The first evil idea that came to her hateful heart was to separate him from his Arab Muslim wife. When she succeeded in doing so, she was determined to fill Insaf's heart with more hatred towards Deng. She did this by playing a dirty double game. She made the estranged wife believe that her rejected black African husband married her because she was a white Arab and had straight, long hair. On the other hand, she convinced the legally outcast African husband, Deng, that Insaf no longer loved or cared for him. The Arab wife never knew that her African husband had come to meet her 3 times. Whenever he visited the house, Haj Abdullah's wife would give Insaf false information, telling her that the knocker at the door was a beggar, a vegetable peddler, or someone who had come to the wrong address. Despite all this, Insaf's anger at Deng did not last even a single day. As soon as she shouted at him and kicked him out of Haj Abdullah's house, she felt the terrible pain in her heart of losing him. She hoped that he would come back that same night and apologize to her for his marital infidelity and for thinking about taking a Muslim wife who would be a Dara or a rival harmful second Muslim wife to her. She stayed up all night thinking about him. Insaf knew that the quarrel between her and Deng is shrouded in mystery. She wished she had given him a chance to explain the mystery. She assured herself that Deng could not have meant from the bottom of his heart or seriously thought what he had said to Haj Abdullah. The next day, she felt incredibly sad when an entire day passed without her husband returning to take her to their love nest. As the days passed, the Arab wife waited impatiently for her African husband to take her to their hut. She was tempted several times to go to the shanty town of Al-Ashish neighborhood and find out what prevented him from returning. Meanwhile, Haj Abdullah's wife always discouraged the Arab wife, Insaf, from thinking about returning to her traitorous Negro husband, Deng. One day, the Arab wife Insaf was surprised when Haja Mariam brought her an engagement proposal. The Muslim man who submitted an engagement request to marry Insaf is a divorced husband who is an Arab and a relative of Haj Mariam. This man has divorced his second Muslim wife and is looking for another Arab girl to marry her. His first Muslim wife died many years ago. He has many children and a large number of grandchildren, and his age is older than Haj Abdullah. Insaf refused the engagement request immediately and asked Haja Mariam not to bring her another marriage proposal and reminded her that she was still inviolable and married under the protection of a Muslim husband who had not yet divorced her. After the first month of their separation, the Arab wife's longing for her African husband reached beyond her ability to keep it inside her heart. By then, she was 4 months pregnant. The child inside her womb and her love for his father made her long for a family reunion. Despite her intense longing, she does not want Hajj Abdullah's family to think that she is pursuing the black African young man who rejected and betrayed her and decided to marry another Arab wife, a virgin, instead of her. Then Insaf told Al-Hajja Maryam that she wanted to recover some of her possessions from her husband Ding's hut. Hajj Abdullah's wife stood against the idea and made her husband stand by her side. When they were unable to convince her, they settled for a compromise. The three agreed that Hajj Abdullah would accompany Insaf to her legally annulled husband's hut and bring her belongings. Moreover, they sternly warned her that if she changed her mind and decided to stay with the black African boy, the family would condemn her as an apostate Muslim woman disobeying the commands and prohibitions of the law of God and His messenger and disown her forever. Insaf made them an empty promise without intending to keep it. Then the Arab wife and the Muslim man, Hajj Abdullah, took a taxi and traveled to the shanty town where the rejected African husband lived in a small hut that not even a stray dog would agree to live in. As once the military lieutenant General Father Majak Nasser said. Insaf was unable to hold back her tears when she saw Dang in his sackcloth of mourning and his miserable condition. She turned her face to hide her tears. Then Hajj Abdullah told the legally annulled African husband why they had come. But the African husband Ding realized the real reason for his Arab wife Insaf's visit to their love nest. So, he went to her and knelt in front of her as if she were the beauty Queen Helen, and he was her lover, Paris, who must kidnap her from Hajj Abdullah's family and start the Trojan War between the racist Sudanese Arabs and the oppressed Juanjo Africans. Dang remained on his knees until Insaf turned her face and looked at him. After that, he stood directly in front of her, and they looked into each other's eyes until they became two souls in one body, as they were before their painful separation. Ding said, "Insaf, how long are you going to boycott me? How long will you deny me? You didn't even give me a chance to explain the misunderstanding between us that day." Hajj Abdullah tried to console me in my distress by saying that if I asked for the hand of his Arab daughter Safa in marriage, he would not reject me. But I never proposed to his daughter, and I had no intention of leaving you and marrying another Arab girl, even if she was Miss Universe. The Arab wife asked her African husband, "Why didn't you come back and explain this to me?" "I came 3 times. And every time, Hajj Abdullah's wife would kick me out of her door as if I were a beggar, a thief, or a stray dog. The 3rd time, Hajj Abdullah himself told me that I should leave his doorstep and not return to his house again." Then the Arab wife, Insaf, turned her gaze away from her African husband, Dang, and faced her uncle, Hajj Abdullah. She is not happy to confront the good Muslim man of his racist wife's lies and hypocrisy. She always respects him and considers him a real father to her, adopting her as his daughter. She had not forgotten for a moment the day he had taken her out of the dirty dumpster and taken her into his house and taken care of her. However, her intolerance of the hateful racial prejudice against her African husband forced her to throw her heart away with those feelings. Then she gave her uncle Hajj Abdullah a long look before speaking to him. "Your wife deceived me about my husband Ding. She made me believe that he is no longer interested in me and does not love me because the Sharia court separated me from him forever. Moreover, she lied to me when she told me that my black African husband wanted to marry her white Arab daughter, Safa. My daughter, Insaf, my wife did this because she loves you. She doesn't want you to get into any more trouble with law enforcement officers. You know what happened that day when you refused to listen to us and went with Dang to the riverbank and both of you were caught by the police while you were doing something indecent and forbidden in a public place that only bad Arab girls could do. I know, Uncle Abdullah, that you did more good to me than my father, Hajj Sulla al-Junaid, did to me. I know you are a good man, but I want you to know that I do not see my African husband the same way others see him. For me, he is the perfect husband. Dang sacrificed his family relationship with his father and mother for the sake of his love for me. He was expelled from his family home, his African father disowned him, and his Ethiopian mother divorced because he insisted on appointing a lawyer to defend me in the criminal court when my Arab family left me to die alone in prison. For my sake he separated himself his African fiancée, Susie, who was a university-graduated and gainfully employed Christian girl. He even left his university studies in medicine and sold his car to pay my defense fees. Therefore, had it not been for him, I would have been convicted of 4 false murder charges, only one of which I committed in defense of my honor. So, I love him sincerely just as he loves me with every cell in his body. Hajj Abdullah said calmly, "But, my dear daughter, Insaf, this African man, Dang, is no longer your Muslim husband. You cannot live with him as husband and wife after the court of God and his messenger annulled your Islamic marriage in which I functioned as your Muslim guardian. You cannot go beyond God's limits." Deng shouted angrily, "This is not God's limits. These are false laws invented by Arab people to justify racial discrimination against their fellow African human beings. God is love and just, and all people whom he created in his image and likeness are equal before him." Although Deng was a Muslim believer, but when he was a child his Abyssinian Christian mother Ababa used to take him to Sunday school in her Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and thus made him learn many things about the Holy Bible. So, some of the fundamental creeds of Christianity that he had learned and never forgotten are God is love and just, and all people whom he created in his image and likeness are equal before him. The Muslim man Hajj Abdullah ignored the words of the African boy which he has neither heard before nor grasped their deep spiritual meanings, and said to the Arab girl, "My beloved daughter, Insaf, take your clothes and other belongings and let us return to our home and family." The Arab wife, Insaf, looked first at her African husband, Dang, and then turned her face toward her uncle, Hajj Abdullah. Her eyes are full of tears. She wiped away her tears before saying to the good old man, "I cannot leave my husband and my home and go with you, my good uncle, Hajj Abdullah. Dang is no longer your legal Muslim husband. If you want to live with him, you will live in an adulterous relationship that will be abhorrent to God and his messenger." "This is not true, uncle. The Sharia court ruling is a racist decision, and I do not believe in it. It justifies racial discrimination against African people. Muslims are treated as masters and slaves. My daughter, Insaf, the decision of the Sharia court is based on the Holy Quran and the Sunnah of the infallible Messenger of God, and therefore this is the law of God and the Sunnah of his beloved chosen Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace. The ruling of these stupid judges in the Sharia court is not from God, but rather from the inspiration of the accursed Satan." When the Arab wife, Insaf, finished her last words, Hajj Abdullah declared her frankly before her African husband, Dang, who was legally abolished, that she had become a blasphemous woman, an infidel, an apostate Muslimah, and an atheist feminist, and he disavowed her. Then he told her that she should never come to his house again no matter what happened to her in the future. Chapter 42. A Sacrifice as a Kurban Offering for True Love. Once the Arab wife, Insaf, and her African husband, Dang, were able to resolve their dispute, they found themselves in a greater challenge because of their religious problem. It has become a matter of life or death for them. They know that they cannot be together as a legal husband and his lawful Muslim wife without risking their lives. According to Sudanese law, which is based on Islamic law, they are no longer husband and wife. They also dropped their plan to flee to South Sudan and live among Christians where Sharia laws do not apply. They do not have any legal document proving their marital relationship if they are interrogated or challenged during their journey from Khartoum to Juba, which will take more than 10 days by train and ship. Their marriage certificate was torn up by these 2 racist Arab policemen who caught them kissing each other on the riverbank and considered it an abominable act practiced in a public place and punishable by Sharia law. They also know that the imam of the mosque who performed their Islamic marriage will not issue a true copy of their certificate because he also accepted the Sharia court ruling that annulled their Islamic marriage on the grounds of inadequacy between their tribes, African versus Arab, which made them unmarriageable. After all the doors of hope were closed in their faces, the African husband suggested that they travel outside Sudan, and as soon as they arrived in any foreign country, they must apply for refugee status and resettlement in the West. The Arab wife expressed her appreciation for the new plan and hoped that they would succeed in migrating out of Sudan. When they arrived at their new plan, the two persecuted lovers found themselves forced to choose between three foreign countries: Egypt, Kenya, and India. At the time when the beloved Deng and Insaf planned to flee their country due to religious persecution and racial discrimination, more than 4 million Sudanese were living in Egypt. Most of them are forced to flee their country and live there due to political persecution, ethnic cleansing, and jihad wars waged by the Sudanese army, Muslim Mujahideen, and the notorious Janjaweed forces in southern Sudan, the Nuba Mountains, and the Darfur region. In Egypt, they can seek safe haven from the dictatorship and barbarism of the Islamic government in Sudan. The genocide in South Sudan, Darfur, and the Nuba Mountains also forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee their towns and villages to Kenya and Chad. Hundreds of thousands of African women were raped before being turned into war slaves and sex maidservants for Arabs. African children were forcibly converted from Christianity to Islam. Slavery is the lesser of the evils experienced by non-Arab people in South Sudan, Darfur, and the Nuba Mountains. Those who do not succeed in escaping to Kenya, Uganda, or Chad will be slaughtered by government militias in the name of the holy war of Islamic Jihad. Reports from Sudanese refugees in Egypt are extremely disturbing. Conditions in refugee camps in Kenya and Chad are also miserable. Egyptian government agents and Arab police treat Sudanese refugees more harshly than they encountered in their homeland. The country that has the least evil for Sudanese refugees is India. About 10,000 Sudanese students studying in Indian universities. 90% of these Sudanese foreign students in India are Northern Arabs. Once they finish their studies, they will try to immigrate to the Arab Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait. Students from South Sudan have good opportunities to obtain refugee status in India and resettlement in one of the Western countries such as Canada, Australia, the United States of America, or some European countries. None of the students like to return to the hell of Sudan, except for supporters of the religious government such as the Muslim Brotherhood. The only way for the persecuted couple to travel to India is through admission to an Indian university. Fortunately, the African husband Deng has cousins who study at Bombay University. He corresponded with them and explained to them the racial problems he was suffering from because he married an Arab girl. They encouraged him to leave Sudan and come with his wife to India. Deng then sent his higher secondary certificate and was accepted into the pre-medical program at the University of Bombay. The southern cousins advised their African cousin to bring his Arab wife on a tourist visa. Insaf does not have a high school diploma because her Arab father took her out of school when she was in the 10th grade, when he discovered that she had fallen in forbidden love with a so-called black-faced African Negro slave. So, at that time, Insaf had not yet completed the 12th grade. For this reason, she can only travel to India on a 6-month tourist visa. Her tourist visa can be changed once she obtains refugee status in India. With the new plan in mind, the couple went to the Indian embassy in Khartoum and obtained their student and tourist visas. By this time, the Arab wife Insaf was 5 months pregnant. Therefore, her pregnancy slowed her movement. The entire process of checking into India took more than 1 month. During this period, the two intimate lovers, Insaf and Deng, spent most of their time hiding inside their small hut in the shanty town of Alash neighborhood. This area, as we mentioned previously, is one of the poorest neighborhoods and has the dirtiest huts in the triangular capital city, Khartoum. Its inhabitants are all of the so-called black Jingo Africans, except for Deng's wife, the Arab girl Insaf. The two lovers never left their hut together. Although the two passionate lovers had booked their flights on the same plane, they went independently to the airline office. On the appointed day of their departure from the hell of Sudan, they woke up exceedingly early in the morning. The first thing they did was pack their bags. Their flight is scheduled to depart from Khartoum International Airport at 3:45 p.m. on the same day. On that day, the two lovers had their last lovemaking in Sudan inside their small hut, like two birds about to fly from their nest and migrate to a beautiful, remote homeland. They reached the peak of their sexual climax, where the beautiful and sexy Arab girl, Insaf, had an earth-shattering orgasm, and the penis of the African lover, Dang, ejaculated a quantity of semen into his lover's pussy, and they became one body. After they packed their bags, they spent the rest of the day inside their small hut, which looked like a cave. The Arab wife, Insaf, resisted the urge to go and bid farewell to Hajj Abdullah and his family. The African prodigal son, Dang, also tended to approach his parents and bid them farewell. They decided to write to them some letters from India and apologize for not informing them of their departure and the reason for their eternal migration from their motherland. The two eternal friends, Insaf and Dang, felt happy and excited that day. They knew that they would leave the land of false pride and hateful racial prejudice and go to a secular, enlightened country where they could be treated as other human beings who enjoy the same equality and dignity regardless of their religion, race, gender, or color. In India, they will be liberated from the unjust Islamic law of the Sharia court, which discriminated between them and invalidated their halal Islamic marriage contract due to the difference in their African and Arab tribes and the colors of their black and white skin. At noon, the lovers changed their clothes and put on new outfits that they had bought especially for their overseas flight. In an abbreviated time, the eternal lovers, Insaf and Dang, were ready to go to Khartoum International Airport. They carried their bags, took their travel documents, passports, and airline tickets, and were about to open the door and leave their little love nest, but they heard the steps of strangers approaching the door of their hut. The barking of dogs, the chatter of black women, and the cries of miserable children indicated that the neighbors did not know the strangers. The violent knock on their door confirmed their fears and suspicions. They realized that only the Sudanese police will knock on the door in this rude and uncivilized manner. The African husband whispered in his Arab wife's ear to step back and let him know who the new arrivals were. He glanced outside. Through a small hole in the tin door, he saw who are the people standing at the door. His vision became filled with the huge bodies of two Arab policemen wearing khaki uniforms, their faces scowling like two terrifying demons emerging from hell. He started sweating and shaking from fear. The two policemen carry large batons, and pistols are strapped to the left side of their waists. Ding somehow overcame his fear and raised his head. He ran to Insaf and grabbed her hands. His wife saw his terrified face and correctly guessed the reason for his fear. She began to tremble like a reed, and her heart began to beat rapidly. Ding leaned his tall body over her small body and brought his face close to hers. His eyes opened wide. "Listen, dear," the African husband whispered in his Arab wife's ear. "Our hut will be invaded in a moment by two Arab policemen armed with blades and firearms. We both cannot escape from them. We do not have a window in our hut to break into, jump through, escape from them, and flee to Khartoum International Airport and travel together. Our only way out is through the door. Therefore, one of us must sacrifice his life for the other, and this Kurban sacrificial offering is me. I will open the door and attack the two armed Arab policemen and give you a safe way to escape from them. Run straight out of our hut, take a taxi, and speed off to Khartoum International Airport. Don't stop or look behind you. Here are the 2 tickets, the 2 visas, the 2 Sudanese passports, and the few foreign American dollars we have. Forget the 2 suitcases and the rest of your luggage because you cannot carry them with you while fleeing from our hut. Remember that you are not alone. You have my baby in your womb. If I got killed as a sacrifice today, I am confident that you will give birth to the baby in India and raise our child, and he will carry my name with pride." Then the frightened Arab wife whispered fearfully in the ear of her brave African husband, "I cannot let you die. I can't go without you. I love you, Dang. I want to die with you. I love you too, Insaf, but this is the only way our love will last. Through you surviving and through the birth of our child, I will live forever. Escape now and go as quickly as possible to Khartoum International Airport and travel to India." Before Dang could finish his words, he heard heavy boots and huge hands beating and trying to force open the door. He pulled his wife aside, rushed to the door, and opened it wide. Before the two Arab policemen rushed inside, he hit one of them on his nose with his fist. The policeman fell on his back and hit his head on the concrete of the dirty running sewer water and fainted. The other policeman raised his baton and hit Ding on the left shoulder. The African wrestler jumped over his body and grabbed his hands. Then Ding shouted as he held the other policeman with difficulty, "Run quickly, my beloved wife, Insaf." The policeman kicked his body, bit him on the shoulder with his sharp teeth, and shook him to free himself from his grip, but he could not. As soon as the Arab wife left the hut, she jumped over the body of the other fallen policeman, who was still unconscious, and entered one of the narrow alleys filled with dirt, holes, and stones, and headed towards the main street. She looked behind her and saw her African husband and the huge Arab policeman wrestling until they fell into the gutter. The black-skinned African male neighbors rushed towards them and tried to separate them, while the black women stood apart as they saw for the first time in their lives a Jingo man daring to attack an armed Arab policeman. By then, the fleeing Arab wife had crossed the narrow corridor and entered the main road. She waved her trembling hand to a taxi, and when it stopped, she got into it. In these tough times, she remembered the day she escaped from her wealthy Arab fiancé, Samir Massoud, in the city of Port Sudan. But the difference is excessively big because that day she escaped from the shadow of scandal, and today she escapes from the specter of death. In a breathless voice, the fleeing Arab wife asked the taxi driver to speed her to Khartoum International Airport. As soon as the driver took his foot off the brake and pressed the accelerator, Insaf heard a pistol shot. She closed her eyes and began to cry bitterly over the killing of her beloved African husband Deng. The frightened Arab wife, Insaf, was unable to see anything before her eyes except blood. Everything before her eyes became stained and covered in red. Her eyes shed rivers of hot tears. She imagined her African husband, Deng, falling into the sinkhole, his white shirt stained with blood and covered in the dirt of the gutter. Her mind is struggling hard to deny the fact that the person she spent the most wonderful days of her life with was brutally murdered before her eyes. The taxi arrived at Khartoum International Airport after a long journey through the crowded streets of the triangular capital. Then the driver opened the door for the beautiful and charming passenger traveling out of her fatherland. Insaf paid the fare with trembling hands, then walked slowly away from the taxi. Her weak feet somehow made it to the crowded entrance of the international airport. Her teary eyes searched everywhere for her brave African husband, who had become a sacrificial victim for their eternal love. She sees all the passengers around her as dangerous Arab Muslim terrorists who killed her beloved African husband. They appeared to her as frightening creatures that could transform into deadly black ghosts and attack and kill her at any time. The crowd then forced her to move on. Insaf moved with the human flow of travelers until she reached the police inspection office. She has no luggage to weigh. A fat Sudanese Arab woman told her to move more quickly because she was blocking the way. While she was standing in the lengthy line of passengers, the Arab wife escaping death was facing the entrance. She is still waiting and hoping for the miraculous appearance of her beloved African husband. Her heart cries for him. Her body longed for his touch, his hugs, his lovemaking. "Can you look at me and show me your travel papers, ma'am?" An international airport police officer told Insaf. The sad Arab wife threw her travel papers on the table without turning her face towards the policeman who addressed her. Despite everything, her eyes are still desperately searching for her African husband, the martyr of love, Deng, in the crowd. "Please, ma'am, take your passport, ticket, and boarding pass and go to gate No. 12. Insaf then snatched her travel papers from the police officer's hand and looked at his face angrily. She hated him bitterly because he was a policeman. She hated his face even more when she saw that he was a northern Arab. She resisted the boiling anger that prompted her to think about extending her right hand and slapping his face with all her might. Then the lonely Arab wife went to gate number 12 and stood aside. She is still looking behind her and waiting for her brave African husband to appear and embrace her. Then the two lovers can fly from the hell of their Muslim country, Sudan, and land in the paradise of the secular state of India. While she was immersed in an ocean of darkness of sadness, The fleeing Arab wife heard the voice of a Sudanese woman addressing her. "Excuse me, miss, are you traveling on flight number 577? Insaf just stared at her without answering her question, and she knew from her elegant dress that she was an air hostess. Before Insaf could show her the ticket, passport, and boarding pass, the flight attendant asked her, "Can I look at your foreign flight papers?" Then she took the travel papers from her hand and looked at them. "Please come with me quickly, miss. We will close the plane door soon." Then the Sudanese flight attendant took the hand of the Arab wife, Insaf, and ran her through the narrow gate number 12. When they arrived on the plane, she asked another air hostess to take the late passenger to her seat. The same miss asked another flight attendant, "Is the plane full now, or is there a late passenger who has not arrived yet?" The second flight attendant replied, "There is still one passenger who has not arrived yet. Give me 5 minutes to find that late passenger." Some of these gullible passengers can get lost in a 1 square meter space. Unless someone drags them like stray sheep and brings them to the plane as if it were a sheep truck, they will not be able to board. Then the flight attendant who brought the late goat ran again to look for the stray sheep passenger. She returned a few minutes later and asked her fellow air hostess to tell her the name of the missing passenger. The flight attendant inside the plane shouted to the flight attendant standing at the entrance, "His name is Mr. Dengmajok." "No wonder he was late," the Sudanese Arab flight attendant shouted sarcastically. Insaf overheard the conversation between the two racist Arab hosts and added them to her hate list. Then the flight attendant came 10 minutes later and said angrily to her colleague, "Please close the plane door and let Mr. Dengmajok return to the African jungle in South Sudan, where he came from and lives like a sloth monkey hanging between the trees." The air hostess's sarcastic racist statements struck the heart of the Arab wife Insaf like poisoned arrows. In response, she stood up from her seat and looked straight into the face of the rude Sudanese flight attendant. Then she shouted loudly, "The late passenger, Mr. Dengmajok, is more civilized, educated, and honorable than you. The African Dengmajok is about to graduate from the University of Khartoum and become a doctor. His southern father is a first lieutenant general and a senior military official in the Sudanese army, and his Ethiopian mother is an English language teacher at the higher secondary school for girls in the city of Riyadh in Khartoum. He is my husband and I am his wife, and I now carry his child in my womb with honor, pride, and dignity." The racist Sudanese hostess fearfully asked, "Who are you addressing with these words, miss?" "I am speaking to you." "Did I speak to you?" "You spoke very disgusting, hateful, and vulgar racist words against my African husband, Mr. Dengmajok." The other flight attendant said politely, "Please, Mrs. Insaf Salah al-Junaid, calm down and sit in your seat." Then she came and stood near the angry Arab wife of the African husband, Mr. Dengmajok Nasser. The same flight attendant continued, "My colleague, Flight Attendant Nawal Ibrahim, always jokes in this ridiculous way. She often asks me to return to my hometown, Wad Sharifi, located on the outskirts of the city of Kassala in eastern Sudan, and ride a camel or donkey, as the girls of Zebediah or the Hadandawa women do." The angry Arab wife did not even take her seat until the air hostess gently patted her shoulder, helped her sit down, and fastened her seat belt. Shortly after, the plane took off without the missing African passenger, Dengmajok, the husband of the most beautiful female passenger on board. The angry Arab wife did not even take her seat until the air hostess gently patted her shoulder, helped her sit down, and fastened her seat belt. Shortly after, the plane took off without the missing African passenger, Dengmajok, the husband of the most beautiful female passenger on board. Chapter 43. The Legal Sharia Ruling on the Adulterer. The military lieutenant general Mr. Mujak Nasir was the first to receive a phone call informing him that his only son, Deng, had been shot dead by a policeman because he had tried to obstruct law enforcement officers by arresting him while he was committing adultery with an adulterous woman who was not his legal wife. The African father immediately called his Ethiopian wife, Ababa, Deng's mother, and told her in a crying voice the sad news. Then he was quickly rushed to Omdurman General Hospital. On his way, he drove through 3 red lights and nearly caused 2 car accidents. 3 traffic police officers chased him on their motorcycles, but did not catch him. He drives his car at a mad speed of more than 100 kilometers per hour through the crowded streets of the capital city. In front of the hospital, he parked his car in the wrong place and rushed to the emergency unit. Mr. Nasser then prostrated himself in front of the gurney, where his son's body was covered with a white sheet stained with the red blood of his murdered son. Shortly after, the Abyssinian mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasser, collapsed next to her son's body and began wailing and crying. The body of the victim, Qurbin of Love Sacrifice Deng, was then transported to the surgery room and 2 doctors and 3 nurses followed behind the stretcher. Mr. Nasser and Mrs. Nasser remained lying on the floor while constantly crying over the death of their beloved son. 3 hours later, one of the doctors came out and knelt in front of the parents. He touched Mr. Nasser's head gently and said to him, "Your son is not dead yet. He is still alive. We removed the bullet from his chest, but he is still in an extremely critical condition. You have to ask God to preserve his life." Another hour later, the stretcher was taken out of the surgery room and 2 nurses carried it to the intensive care unit. The parents wanted to take a look at their son, but the nursing staff prevented them. After surgery, Deng stayed in the intensive care unit for a week. During this period, he remained in a coma. His recovery has been a terribly slow process. It took 1 month before Deng was able to open his eyes and recognize the people around him. During that period, his parents spent a lot of money on his treatment. They paid for his stay in a private room in the hospital. They bought the most expensive medicine for his quick recovery. As soon as the doctor declared Deng competent to speak to him, 3 police officers entered his private room and interrogated him. They took his statements about the incident and explained to him the reason 2 policemen raided his shack in the shanty town of Alash neighborhood more than a month ago. Before they left, they chained his right leg to the hospital bed in his private room and kept 2 armed policemen in front of his room to guard him and prevent him from escaping before he was tried for the crime of adultery. At the door, Mr. Nasser intercepted the police officers and demanded an explanation for the inhumane treatment to which his son had been subjected. The African father shouted at the police officer, "My son is not a rabid dog to be chained from his leg to his hospital bed." "Your son is under arrest, sir," one of the police officers said. Mr. Nasser asked, "What is his crime?" "Your son assaulted 2 policemen while they were carrying out their duty. My son would not have done something like this unless the 2 policemen had attacked him first and tried to kill him for no good reason." The 2 policemen came to arrest him in his hut because he had violated Islamic law by having illegal sexual intercourse with his ex-wife, Mrs. Insaf Sulla al-Junaid, who had been separated from him by the Sharia court. The Sharia court judge had annulled his Islamic marriage to her. Therefore, they were living together in an adulterous relationship, which has become unacceptable and forbidden by Sharia law for them and is punishable by law. Why didn't the law prevent that criminal Arab whore from returning to my son's hut? Your son prevented the police from arresting the girl in question. She ran away from their hut and disappeared somewhere. She is now a girl wanted by the police on charges of committing adultery with a man other than her legal husband and escaping arrest. I will file a complaint with the highest authority at the military headquarters because of the ill treatment to which my sick son was subjected. Please go ahead and file your complaint against us. But if you try to hinder us from doing our duty, we will arrest you and chain you like your criminal son. We may even beat you to death if you try to obstruct justice. Do you know who I am? I don't care who you are. I am a major general and a senior official in the Sudanese army. Even if you are the president of the Democratic Republic of Sudan, I will arrest you and put you on chains if you break the law." 2 weeks later, the African husband Deng was released from the hospital and taken to prison in a police car. His father tried to release him but failed. The prison administration even deprived the father of his right to bail his son before his appearance before the Sharia court judge. Not long after the trial of the accused, Deng Mujak Nasir, was held on Sunday afternoon. In the Sharia court in Khartoum, accused Deng was found guilty of violating the law by committing adultery with a woman who was not his legal wife. The accused fugitive woman, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, was also convicted in absentia of the same immoral crime. Both adulterers were sentenced to 100 lashes on their bare backs and buttocks. Mr. Majak Nasir went everywhere and did everything he could in the hope of preventing the Sharia court from beating his son to death. He met with the highest authority in the Sudanese army and begged them to intervene and save the life of his only son. To satisfy him, the commander-in-chief of the military headquarters telephoned the president of Sudan and asked him to drop the charge of adultery against the son of the first lieutenant general, Mr. Majak Nasir. He praised the courageous stance shown by the military general, Mr. Nasser, in the many battles he fought in South Sudan against the Christian infidel rebels, followers of John Garang de Mabir. Then Mr. President asked the Sharia court to stop the implementation of the adultery ruling. The Sharia court judge rejected the request and informed His Excellency the President that no human being can escape the punishment of God and His noble Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. To support his irrevocable religious ruling, the judge quoted the Prophet's hadith in which he said that if Fatima, Muhammad's daughter, had stolen, Muhammad would have cut off her hand. The president could not grant the convicted adulterer Deng a presidential pardon as he did to Insaf because the Sharia court's ruling is irrevocable and cannot be annulled. When all humanitarian efforts failed, Mr. Majak Nasser approached the Sharia court and offered to pay 100,000 Sudanese pounds for each whip against his innocent son. The chief judge of the Sharia court, who issued the flogging sentence against Deng, informed the father Mr. Majak Nasir that even if he offered $10,000 for each whip, the punishment of God and his messenger could not be lifted from his adulterous son. When the so-called divine judgment was conducted on the adulterer Deng on Friday afternoon, his body turned into a corpse again. The punishment for adultery was conducted by 2 executioners in a public place and witnessed by a group of believers, as commanded by the Quranic text. His flesh had been torn apart by whips and his spine had been severely damaged. Before the executioners reached 40 lashes, Deng lost consciousness. Despite this, the 2 cruel executioners brutally beat the back of the adulterous African husband until they completed 100 lashes. Then his body was transported in an ambulance to the hospital to conduct an autopsy on the lifeless body that was brutally killed. But Mr. Majak Nasir insisted that 3 doctors must examine his son's body before he could be taken for an autopsy. A doctor had already examined Deng's body and declared him dead. A second doctor also came and examined the body and confirmed the first doctor's statements. The nursing staff and 3 policemen tried to convince the father to allow them to transfer his son's body into the autopsy room. However, Mr. Majak Nasir grabbed the stretcher and told them that unless they killed him, he would not leave the stretcher or allow them to take his dead son for an autopsy. The nursing staff understood that intense sadness had taken over the father's heart and that there was no way to convince him but to surrender to his request. Therefore, out of mercy and compassion, a 3rd doctor was requested to examine the son's lifeless body. The 3rd doctor confirmed the death of the African son, but said there was still life in his brain. He assured the medical team that his brain would also die within a few minutes. At present, the son is clinically dead. Half an hour later, the same doctor came and examined Deng's body. The medical team was then asked to wait for another 30 minutes. His parents entered into fits of anger when they heard the doctor's words. Mr. Nasser then threatened to telephone the military headquarters and report this inhumane treatment of his son's body. When the nursing staff refused to transfer the body to the emergency unit, the angry father informed his senior commanders at the military headquarters at the General Command. Half an hour later, the military ambulance arrived at the civil hospital. The medical staff at the civil hospital initially refused to allow the dead son's body to be transferred to the military hospital. The police also tried to prevent the army soldiers from transporting the body to the military hospital. The doctor, who last examined the body, ordered that the clinically dead body be sent to the emergency unit until it was brain dead. Dang's father and mother opposed the idea and insisted that their son's body should be transferred to the military hospital. Reluctantly, the medical team and police officers agreed to the transfer. Inside the military ambulance, Dang's body was filled with blood. At the military hospital, doctors and nurses realized that Dang's body had lost a lot of fluid and blood. When they examined his damaged back, they discovered that they could not perform any surgery on him. They only cleaned the deep wounds and covered his seriously injured back with a huge bandage. Then the body was kept inside the intensive care unit until the morning. Throughout the night, military nursing staff supplied blood and fluids to the severely damaged body. Dang remained in a coma for 3 days, and every doctor who examined his body lost hope of his survival. Each one of them expected that he would die before sunrise the next morning. Fortunately, on the 4th night, a senior surgeon gave a tiny ray of hope to the distressed parents. This military surgeon is called Hassan Mabruk, and he is a brigadier general originally from South Sudan and the Dinka tribe. Because of the beating, a week later, doctors at the military hospital decided to perform major surgery on Dang's damaged body. The operation was performed by the 2 best neurosurgeons in the military hospital, Hassan Mabruk and Koktia. The military neurosurgeon Kokotia was a black African Sudanese originally from the Nuba Mountains. The operation took 7 long hours. After the complex surgery, the parents were told by the military hospital that their son might live, but he might not be able to walk or talk again. His spine was severely injured due to severe flogging during the execution of the adultery sentence on him in a public place. The African husband, who miraculously survived 2 premeditated murder attempts, remained in the military hospital for a month until his release. He was in a catatonic state and could not move any part of his paralyzed body when his parents returned him home. His parents took him to their beautiful residence, which is located in a luxurious neighborhood called Riyadh City. On the same day, Mr. Majak Nasir reconciled with his divorced wife, Mrs. Ababa Nasir. He apologized for her first divorce, took her back as his wife, and promised that he would not divorce her again, no matter what happened between them. The Ethiopian mother then took an indefinite leave from her teaching job at the girls' senior secondary school and stayed home to care for and nurse her beloved son. Meanwhile, Dang has not said a word since the Sharia court flogged him with 100 lashes on his bare back. After a month, he regained consciousness and mental strength, but he was unable to express his thoughts and feelings in words. 3 months later, the military neurosurgeon Hassan Mabruk recommended that Dang undergo another spinal surgery. But he said that this complex and difficult surgery cannot be performed in Sudan due to the lack of appropriate medical equipment. For this reason, the African neurosurgeon recommended to the parents that the sick son should be sent to London in the United Kingdom to undergo such complex and difficult neurological surgery on the damaged spine. He warned them not to allow any Sudanese, Egyptian, Arab, or African neurosurgeon to perform this difficult operation on their son, and he expected it to end in permanent paralysis or death inside the surgery room. The parents accepted the advice, and 3 weeks later, Mrs. Ababa Nasser traveled with her beloved son Dang to England. Spinal surgery was performed 3 days after they arrived in London. The surgery process is exceptionally long and complicated. A good British neurosurgeon performed it. Unfortunately, after the operation, some English doctors discovered that the Sudanese son, Dang, might not be able to walk again for the rest of his life. So, he was put in a wheelchair. However, the second spinal nerve surgery helped the son move his tongue and speak. Not long after that, Dang, the disabled African son, and his Ethiopian mother, Ababa, returned to Sudan with great disappointment and frustration. What frustrated the parents even more was that their son was unable to stand on his feet and return to the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Khartoum.
The Haram.
This is a story